The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell starts right now. Hey, Lawrence.
Hey, Jen. A big shakeup in Colorado politics, but I guess the Senator Bennett gets to just stay in the Senate and consider whether he wants to run for re-election next time.
That's true. And, you know, it was an interesting one. I just spoke with Phil Weiser, of course, who is the nominee.
Yeah.
And he's a two-time attorney general. He knows how to fight Trump, too. So as people get to know him, that's also pretty exciting. But didn't surprise the people of Colorado, though. But it's an interesting race to talk about.
Yeah, and it was great to just hear from him because that's really the first I've actually seen of him. I remember reading a poll showing that he was 30 points behind, and I kind of stopped paying attention for a while, and then suddenly something happened there.
Yeah, no kidding. And hearing him talk, it's like, oh, he's got a lot of fight in him. He's going to be interesting to watch. And the guy he's running against is quite something, is a diplomatic way of saying it.
Yeah, to put it mildly. Yeah. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Thank you. Well, the old saying, when you've got it, flaunt it, are words Donald Trump has lived by. He has tried to flaunt his wealth in every public way possible
Way
throughout
too
his
early
life.
with Ali Vitale is coming up next.
And has often meant flaunting things that did not belong to him, like some buildings that bore his name. And it has meant flaunting things that he really couldn't afford, like the yacht that he used to keep in New York Harbor until he was forced to sell it as bankruptcy closed in on him. The saying, when you've got it, flaunt it, was never meant as advice for politicians. But today, Donald Trump flaunted the single biggest piece of corruption in American history. Donald Trump showed off the largest object to ever be corruptly sought and accepted by an American politician.
The head of Boeing said this is considered the best 747 they've ever built. And I went to Qatar. I said I'd like to use it for a period of time because the other ones, as you know, are under construction. They'll be here in 2 years. And because, you know, the plane is 35 years old. So I said I'd like to use it. And the Emir, Tamim, who's a great gentleman, he said, no, I'd like to make a contribution to the country.
The country isn't going to use that $400 million gift that the Emir gave to Donald Trump. The plan is for Donald Trump to be the only person who ever uses that plane. That is the corrupt plan for that plane. The United States of America already has two perfectly capable and functioning 747s in service right now as Air Force One. And the federal government has ordered two more Boeing 747s to replace those two versions of Air Force One that are currently operating. But Donald Trump wanted one that he could take home with him. And so the scheme that a Democratic Congress must find a way to prevent is for Donald Trump to take that 747 with him as part of his so-called presidential library, and then use it to fly wherever he wants to go after his time in office. The country will never get to fly on that plane, but the country actually ended up having to pay for that plane hundreds of millions of dollars, at least, to outfit it as a workable version of Air Force One. When asked how much that cost the American taxpayer today, Donald Trump refused to answer.
How much did it cost American taxpayers to upgrade the plane?
Well, it costs very little relative to what it would cost if we did it a different way. So this was a gift from a country that's treated us very well.
By treated us very well, he means, of course, him and his family. Donald Trump doesn't have to be legally careful anymore about his choice of words in situations like this after the Republican-dominated Supreme Court gave him immunity from criminal prosecution for anything he does in his official capacity as president. And so Donald Trump just confessed to actually soliciting this so-called gift. He said, I went to Qatar and said, I'd like to use it. Those are his exact words today. And suddenly, for the first time in world history, a president of the United States was given an airplane from another country. Donald Trump said today that he went to a foreign dictator and asked him for a plane. And he used that plane for the first time today to fly to a dedication of the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library. Now, it might seem a little late to just now be dedicating a presidential library to someone who was president more than 100 years ago, but presidential libraries are actually a relatively new thing in presidential history, beginning with President Herbert Hoover, who left office on Inauguration Day in 1933. Teddy Roosevelt was a rich New York Republican, like Donald Trump, who served as president from 1901 to 1909. In a first for presidential library dedication speeches, Donald Trump today did not quote the president who was being commemorated. Because the problem for Donald Trump today in quoting Teddy Roosevelt is Teddy Roosevelt saying things like, quote, "No man can be a good citizen who is not a good husband and a good father, who is not honest in his dealings with other men and women, faithful to his friends and fearless in the presence of his foes, who has not got a sound heart, a sound mind, and a sound body." Teddy Roosevelt would be horrified by Donald Trump's mode of transportation today. Teddy Roosevelt would have immediately urged the impeachment of a president who solicited a gift from anyone, especially a foreign dictator. And Teddy Roosevelt would have despised the small-mindedness of Donald Trump, because it was Teddy Roosevelt who said, quote, "The screaming vulgarity of the foolish spread-eagle orator who is continually yelling defiance at Europe, praising everything American, good and bad, and resenting the introduction of any reform because it has previously been tried successfully abroad, is offensive and contemptible to the last degree." Offensive and contemptible, that is exactly what Teddy Roosevelt surely would have said about the screaming vulgarity of the foolish, spread-eagled orator flying on a counterfeit Air Force One today. Although the 747 is the single largest object Donald Trump has received as president, it is not the highest dollar reward he has obtained by what the Wall Street Journal now calls, quote, "profiting off the presidency." New reporting in the New York Times reveals Donald Trump, quote, "reaped a stunning windfall in his first year back in the White House, including about $1.4 billion from his family's cryptocurrency businesses," a new filing shows. All told, the president pulled in at least $2.2 billion, a figure that includes other parts of his vast holdings, such as his real estate assets. That compares to a minimum of $622 million his enterprises pulled in for all of 2024 before he returned to the presidency. The New York Times notes that Donald Trump's biggest haul has come from the cryptocurrency business, which he himself is in a position to regulate. Quote, "One of his biggest hauls in 2025 came when an investment firm tied to the United Arab Emirates bought nearly half of the Trump family's main crypto company, World Liberty Financial, a transaction that blurred the line between foreign policy and private enterprise." Mr. Trump also collected hundreds of millions of dollars from sales of his Trump meme coin and World Liberty's sale of its own digital tokens. The president's finances, which had been something of a mystery, highlight a conflict in his crypto business. Mr. Trump is a major crypto industry operator and its top policymaker. Tonight, the lead editorial on the Wall Street Journal is headlined "The Trump Family and Honest Graft," with the subheadline, "They are profiting off the presidency in ways that demean the office." The Wall Street Journal editorial says, quote, "The Trumps are seeing their opportunities and taking them in the tradition of what Tammany Hall's George Washington Plunkett called honest graft, For Princeton history majors, Tammany Hall was a 19th century Democratic political machine. Assuming all of this is legal, it's still an unseemly display of using the presidency for family profit. It's hard to believe the Trump boys would be able to do the same deals if Dad wasn't in the Oval Office. If Democrats take back the House or Senate this November, they will have a field day probing the Trump family deals. Charges of GOP corruption will resound through 2028. Foreigners may come to think they can buy American goodwill or favors if they cut the Trumps in on the action. Americans, and especially his supporters, deserve better from this or any president. And here was Donald Trump's defense today for what the Wall Street Journal calls his profiting off the presidency.
To critics who say you're profiting off the presidency, Mr.
Well, you know why I'm profiting? Because the stock market's going up. Everybody's profiting. If you have a 401k, how's your 401k done? It's about up 85%. Thank you, President Trump. So we're all profiting. I'm profiting because I have a lot of money and a lot of cash.
Everybody's profiting. Wall Street coined the phrase taco Trump, to mean Trump always chickens out. But they came up with that term taco only after Donald Trump actually did chicken out on some of his most insane tariff proposals when the deadline for imposing those tariffs arrived. And now Taco Trump is doing it more than a month before the most important deadline he has ever had, the 60-day deadline for negotiating a final agreement with Iran to end his war with Iran. That 60-day deadline is August 18th. And today, the Wall Street Journal is reporting, quote, Trump has told aides he believes another round of full-scale attacks could derail diplomacy and hurt Washington's chances of ultimately dismantling Iran's nuclear program. Trump also has told aides that he is fine if negotiations with Tehran blow past an August 18th deadline for a nuclear deal, the officials said. Okay, well, right-wing media can cancel those big tributes they were planning for August 18th when Donald Trump would announce his final breakthrough peace deal with Iran, complete with a nuclear negotiated agreement. Iran reads the Wall Street Journal, too. They saw that line as soon as it was in print today. Quote, he is fine if negotiations with Iran blow past an August 18th deadline for a nuclear deal. And today, when asked about how the negotiations were going, the man who the Washington Post documented told over 30,000 lies in the White House during his first 4 years said this.
As far as things are going, the denuclearization of Iran is moving along well. They've had very good meetings, and we'll see. We hit them very hard for 3 nights, as you know, but we're getting along very well. So I call it the denuclearization, and it's all taking place. It's all going well.
Nothing is taking place. Nothing is going well with Iran. There is no denuclearization. The Iranians won't even talk to Donald Trump's son-in-law or the real estate developer that Donald Trump has sent to talk to them. There have been 0 negotiations about the nuclear material Iran currently possesses or Iran's nuclear future. It's not all taking place. It's not going very well. It is very clear to the Iranian negotiators that Donald Trump cares more about taking a joyride today on a plane given to him by a dictator of a country that Iran attacked during Donald Trump's war, a country that discovered the hard way that Donald Trump cannot protect them, no matter how many flying palaces the dictator gives him. Leading off our discussion tonight is Democratic Congressman Chris Deluzio of Pennsylvania. He's a member of the House Armed Services Committee and a Navy veteran. Congressman Deluzio, one of your great assets that you bring to this discussion is your own personal familiarity patrolling the Strait of Hormuz, which we now discover is going to possibly have a dual toll system on it on each side after the end of the so-called 60 days, when Iran put in writing that at the end of 60 days, they might just start charging for passage through the strait. And now they might not be the only country doing that.
Lawrence, I did sail through there as a naval officer, and anyone who's worn the uniform, who's worked in national security, would have known that if you'd started a war with Iran, there was a strong likelihood they would shut down the Strait of Hormuz. And we are in a worse place now than we were before Donald Trump started the war. The energy shocks continue. We continue to pay for it here at home. And I just look at this war and I ask, what was this all for? That more than a dozen Americans dead, the hundreds wounded, Iranian school children even killed, billions of dollars, and for what? This has been a strategic blunder.
And we have Trump staff leaking to the Wall Street Journal that he's perfectly happy to crash through the August 18th deadline. I think that's something that everyone already knew. When you saw the memo of understanding, the idea that the 60 days would actually be a real deadline seemed absurd on its face.
It was. And look, this memorandum of understanding, this MOU, I was on the briefing that Secretary Rubio and Steve Witkoff gave members of Congress, unclassified. Let's be clear about what this MOU, this memorandum of understanding is. It's just an agreement to negotiate. And the basic thrust of that agreement was there wouldn't be fighting. Well, there has been fighting. The Strait of Hormuz has not been opened as promised. Traffic continues to fluctuate. And this thing, again, is just an agreement to negotiate all the rest in hopes that our government can get us back to the situation before Donald Trump started the war. This has, again, as I keep saying, it has been a strategic disaster for Donald Trump.
So the Wall Street Journal is predicting that if the Democrats win the House of Representatives, you will start conducting, your committees will start conducting investigations of the Trump family businesses and possible corruption therein. Is the Wall Street Journal right?
Oh, absolutely. And look, where there's law breaking, we should find it. Where people in Donald Trump's orbit, his family, his advisors, his business associates are shaking down companies or foreign governments, we will find it. And for those on the other side of those purported bribes, they should think twice, because there will be accountability. We will be digging in, we'll be seeking documents and all the rest. Accountability will come.
And we've already seen that Donald Trump's plan for that plane that he took from that dictator is to somehow fold it into his so-called presidential library so that it will be there for his personal use. What powers does Congress have to prevent that from happening?
Well, the Constitution, as you know, it bars presidents from taking and accepting gifts from foreign powers unless Congress says okay. I can't imagine that Congress would say okay. I'm not going to say okay to that. And let's remember, there already are 2 new Air Force One jets coming down the line to update the fleet. And Donald Trump and his family has plenty of business in Qatar, including a golf course development that's involved with a Qatari-controlled company. I mean, this stuff just reeks of corruption. It's nasty. I think the American people see it for what it is.
We have new reporting showing that Donald Trump's so-called allies in the region of this war that he started are not trusting him, not cooperating with him. Saudi Arabia pulling back on certain agreements, certain assumptions that Donald Trump thought that he had with Saudi Arabia. Apparently a screaming phone call, one of those screaming Trump phone calls between Donald Trump and the dictator of Saudi Arabia. And so he seems to be discovering that that neighborhood is a little more complex than he realized.
It certainly is. I mean, he wasn't able to protect our allies in the Gulf, number one. Number two, he has shown that the United States now under his leadership has been unable to keep the Strait of Hormuz open, to keep commerce and oil flowing out of the Gulf. It has disrupted energy markets. And so I think the world sees this. Certainly allies in the region see it. And remember, this is a president who in his administration, before starting this war with Iran, shut down new clean energy projects that would have made us less exposed to oil shocks that a war with Iran would cause. And that's exactly what we got.
Pennsylvania Congressman Chris Deluzio, thank you very much for starting off our coverage tonight.
Thank you, Lawrence.
And coming up, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse will join us next. The Republican majority on the Supreme Court issued a 6-3 opinion yesterday on campaign finance law, which allows unlimited coordination of campaign spending between political parties and their candidates. Donald Trump called the opinion, quote, a big win for Republicans. And Senator Sheldon Whitehouse read the opinion this way, quote, by blessing this overtly partisan challenge to a common sense election spending limit, the extremist wing of the court again delivered the goods for the GOP billionaires and right-wing special interests who captured it. Last night on this program, Senator Cory Booker said this.
This is a corrupt court, and we know that because there's a billionaire class, and my brother, Senator Whitehouse, points this out so much. There's a billionaire class that circles around this. They lavish Supreme Court members with gifts, RVs, paying family tuitions, lavish vacations. In New Jersey, if a judge did that, they would be carried out in handcuffs, put in prison.
And joining us now is Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island, a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator, Donald Trump says he greets this opinion as, quote, a big win for Republicans. He agrees, apparently, with Senator Booker and with you.
Yeah, and if you wanted another clue, the petitioner in the case was the National Republican Senate Committee. So, yeah, this is a big win for Republicans. And it's important for people looking at this to not just look at what gets said in these decisions by the justices writing the opinions, but to look at the pattern. Because what you see is a relentless pattern of this captured Supreme Court in every major political decision, having the decision go in favor of the Republican Party. We saw it with gerrymandering, when the huge Republican red map effort took place that turned Congress into the hands of the Republican Party. Even when they won a minority of the popular vote, they still got Congress thanks to red map. There is the Supreme Court clearing the way for gerrymandering. Don't worry, we won't interfere. Then comes Citizens United and its follow-on cases that allowed immense amounts of dark money into politics, which the big Republican donors were ready for. And for really a decade, that created a Republican dark money rout in American politics. We've watched their destruction of the Voting Rights Act to shore up in Republican-controlled states the ability of the legislature to make it harder for people who want to vote for Democrats to vote. And now here you've got this decision in that pattern that allows more money into politics, allows more influence on the part of big donors. I don't know about your viewers, Lawrence, but I doubt there are too many of them who think that big donors really don't have enough influence in American politics right now. We need to make sure that they can spend more and buy more influence.
So we have the Wall Street Journal predicting that if the Democrats win the Senate, you on your committee and other committees will be investigating Trump family corruption. On the Senate Judiciary Committee, will you be able to investigate in a meaningful way the kind of judicial corruption that seems to be happening around us?
Yeah, I'm pretty confident that we will. We will need to work in tandem with the House Republican, Senate, the House Judiciary Committee, Jamie Raskin's committee, because a Senate Judiciary Committee subpoena has to go to the Senate floor, as you'll remember. And on the Senate floor, they can filibuster it so that it can't be made enforceable. You can issue the subpoena, but you can't enforce the subpoena. So I will need to be working with, I hope, Chairman Raskin in order to make sure that we can actually get these subpoenas out there and understand from people like Leonard Leo how the court was captured. Understand from people like Clarence Thomas, did he or did he not pay his taxes on the income from the loan that was forgiven for his deluxe motorhome? He won't say, yeah, I paid the taxes with this money on this date. So, there are a lot of questions that need digging into, and it's probably a 30-year story going back to the Powell memo and the early billionaire efforts to capture the court, Leonard Leo's role in getting Alito and Roberts onto the court. There's a wonderful story to tell, and we intend to tell it.
Could a Democratic-controlled Senate Judiciary Committee compel Clarence Thomas to testify?
I believe so. I think there's a reasonable case to be made that if we're trying to influence a judicial decision, then a Supreme Court justice would be within his rights to say, no, I'm not going to testify about a judicial decision. I'm not going to explain it to you. I'm not going to let you pressure me. I'm an independent judge and I make my own decisions about judicial matters. If it has to do with whether he paid his taxes, whether he's a tax cheat, how the administrative task of reporting things by Supreme Court justices is being accomplished, things like that are very hard to pretend aren't a proper subject of congressional scrutiny.
I want to read you a passage of Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan's book, Regime Change, because it just outlines the size of the challenge of facing a possible Democratic Congress. And this is about the corruption. It says the tributes came in many forms: a plane from the Qatari royals and hundreds of millions of dollars from America's wealthiest individuals and corporations to fund Trump's political operation, his presidential library, and a giant new ballroom on the grounds of the White House. Foreign investors saw a more straightforward path to influence, putting money directly into the pockets of the Trump family through their crypto ventures. There was so much capitulation, so much conquest, so much corruption. It became hard to follow. It would be the job of a Democratic Congress to figure out, to map out how to follow all of that.
Yeah, it's what military aviators would call a target-rich environment. And we need to be very smart about which particular acts of corruption we put the most focus on. And bear in mind that this election is going to be very much about the day-to-day finances of the average American family and how stuff just costs too much, and where the corruption links to higher costs for Americans, like higher electric rates, because Trump's cronies are stopping cheaper, clean energy, so the grid has to go to the expensive fossil fuel stuff to pay off his corrupt fossil fuel donors. Now there's a story that combines cost and corruption very clearly. But you are right. We could get lost in the amount of corruption that Trump has unleashed, and we'll have to be smart about being focused.
Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
And coming up, something special. 4 years ago yesterday, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson was sworn in as a Supreme Court justice. Pulitzer Prize-winning author Isabel Wilkerson joined our coverage that night and provided invaluable insight about that day. And yesterday, Justice Jackson quoted Isabel Wilkerson in her concurring opinion on birthright citizenship. Isabel Wilkerson joins us next. Last night, Pulitzer Prize-winning historian, Yale professor David Blight said this about Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson's opinion in the birthright citizenship case.
I already emailed the executive director of the Organization of American Historians, and I said, is there any way we could put Jackson's opinion in the next issue of the Journal of American History? Because frankly, Lawrence, it reads like a historical essay. It is a historical essay. It's deeply researched. She not only quotes from me or quotes Frederick Douglass several times, but 6, 7 other historians, the best historians of Reconstruction. And, you know, it sets up her essential argument, which is that Section 1 of the 14th, and especially birthright citizenship, is rooted in universalist principles.
Justice Jackson's opinion also cited our next guest, also a Pulitzer Prize winner, Isabel Wilkerson, and her book, Caste: The Origins of Our Discontents. Justice Jackson included this quote from the book in her opinion. A caste system is an artificial construction of fixed and embedded ranking of human value that sets the presumed supremacy of one group against the presumed inferiority of other groups on the basis of ancestry and often immutable traits that would be neutral in the abstract, but are ascribed life and death meaning in a hierarchy favoring the dominant caste whose forebears designed it. And in a passage reflecting Isabel Wilkerson's thinking about caste, Justice Jackson wrote, "The firmest foundation for freedom would require an anti-caste reset, both for his sake and for ours, and would benefit all." Joining us now is Isabel Wilkerson, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author of the New York Times bestseller, Caste: The Origins of Our Discontents. Isabel, thank you very much for joining us again tonight. And as I was reading that opinion yesterday, I was thinking about you on every other line, eager to hear what you had to say about it. And what did you feel? What were you feeling when that opinion came out and when you got a chance to read it?
Well, I was feeling all kinds of things. I mean, first of all, she's brilliant. She's not just a Supreme Court justice, but she's also a historian. She is a researcher. She's a scholar. And so to see that this book and its concepts were cited in her concurrence for this monumental historic decision, I was absolutely floored. I was stunned. I was honored beyond belief. This is a book I actually didn't even want to write. It was a book that I felt compelled to write because of the circumstances in which we find ourselves as a nation. And I thought that this would be a way to shine a light on sort of an X-ray of our country, using language that a lot of Americans are not accustomed to, but steeped in history. And the idea that this is now incorporated into the body of this august piece of work that she's created, for all time. I mean, for it to have reached the highest levels of the land is just really astounding to me, and I'm so incredibly grateful and humbled to know that it's there.
So it seems like one of the simpler Supreme Court cases of our lives, really. Just what do these simple words of the Constitution actually mean? That words that have been completely clear to us for our entire lives suddenly became a subject of debate in that Supreme Court. And I said last night that I had a feeling that one way of doing this is just a one-word decision saying, this is what it means and we're done. But the concurrence by Justice Jackson, which she didn't have to write, she could have just joined the majority opinion, she's one of the yes votes, seems to reveal the importance of having this range of experience on the Supreme Court, something that Joe Biden obviously recognized in his choice of this justice.
Well, the genealogists have found that her ancestors on both sides were from Georgia. They were enslaved people in Georgia, and there are records that show that some of her ancestors have been, which is very, very common, have been sharecroppers, because that's what happened after the Civil War, as opposed to truly letting go of slavery. They created a new form of slavery. And so this is deeply embedded in the history of so many African Americans. And she, I feel, in the work that she did, was channeling the ancestors, and what was on their hearts and their minds and their dreams. And one of the things that she says so clearly is that when they were seeking to be recognized as citizens, they were not looking merely for themselves, which speaks to the role that African Americans have had in American history throughout the experience on their soil. And that is that they were looking for this to be, they were essentially seeing themselves as the vanguard, in the forefront of rights for all marginalized people. And essentially their suffering and their sacrifices made a way for all people, regardless of where they might have been in the hierarchy.
It was fascinating to see in the opinion, Frederick Douglass still to this day influencing the thinking and the results in American government in Washington, D.C. Just just repeated references to him in the opinion.
It was an honor to be in such an august company, to tell you the truth. I want to say that I just find it so fitting that the Supreme Court, for all of its mysteries, reaffirmed birthright citizenship, the foundation of what it means to be an American. And, to do this on the eve of the 250th anniversary of the United States, I think is extremely meaningful. It reinforces the language that she was using also, which was this idea of the second founding, which was the remaking of the country through the Reconstruction Amendments, after essentially the Civil War practically broke the country apart. So what it does is it calls upon us to recognize that, unlike the old country where from which we declared independence, we are a nation of people from all over the world, and we, together made a country that had never existed before. And so the idea of this being reaffirmed on the eve of the 250th anniversary feels like it's a full circle recognition, particularly with all that we've been through as a nation in the last, in recent times. This seems like a fitting moment for this to have happened.
We're going to squeeze in a quick commercial break here, and we will be right back with Isabel Wilkerson. In the final lines of her best-selling book, Caste: The Origins of Our Discontents, Isabel Wilkerson writes, "In a world without caste, being male or female, light or dark, immigrant or native-born would have no bearing on what anyone was perceived as being capable of. In a world without caste, we would all be invested in the well-being of others in our species, if only for our own survival, and recognize that we are in need of one another more than we have been led to believe. We would join forces with indigenous people around the world, raising the alarm as fires rage and glaciers melt. We would see that when others suffer, the collective human body is set back from the progression of our species. A world without caste would set everyone free." Isabel, Justice Jackson seemed to echo that very last line of yours, "A world without caste would set everyone free." There was a passage in her opinion that seemed to echo that.
Yeah, I think that what we're facing right now is an existential crisis, and I believe that there's actually a reason why we're witnessing this existential crisis at this exact moment. You kind of wonder, why would the universe bring this level of discord and upheaval at this precise moment of the country's landmark 250th anniversary? And there has to be a reason, and I think that what it's doing is it is forcing us to basically to shake ourselves out of lethargy and out of complacency. It's incontrovertible. Everyone can see the upheaval that's unfolding around us. And I feel that what this is saying is that we have to come to face with our history and to reckon with that history. And that the only way to get past that and get to perhaps a world where we do not have these deep divisions is to find a way to reckon with the history. And that means you have to know the history, first of all. And then I think we need to work toward the kind of country that we would, as Americans, want it to be.
Are there episodes in our history that give you grounds for hope of moving in a better direction?
Well, I want to say that I am always inspired by the Great Migration that I wrote about. And the reason I say that is because these are people who had absolutely nothing. And by sheer will and perseverance and courage, they made a way out of no way, and they just decided to disperse themselves all over the country. And I'm inspired by that because that is what we all have in common. All of us have in common this idea of having come from far, far away to a place that, that our ancestors having come far, far away to a place that they'd never seen, in hopes that life might be better. That is what we all have in common. And that means that we all have an ancestor in our background who had to have been, a young person about to board a ship that's going to cross the Atlantic Ocean or the Pacific Ocean, or a young person who was loading up a truck that's going to cross the Rio Grande, or a young person who's at a train depot or a bus station about to board a bus or a train that's going to cross hillsides and rivers to get to what they hope would be freedom in the North or the West. And with those people, those young people in all our backgrounds are the people who raised them. And that meant that they had to leave all that they'd known, their mother, father, grandparents, whoever it might have been, to come to a place they'd never seen and not know if they'd ever see those loved ones again or the land that they'd come from. Of course, there was no easy way of communicating with them. So that might be a complete break from all that they'd known and the people that they'd loved. And so I think that the people who made that courageous step in so many of our backgrounds, I do not believe that they made that sacrifice only to see their descendants at war with one another. I do not believe that. I believe that they came hoping for the absolute best for their descendants and for everyone in the space that they were entering. And so I believe that what we now have to do is to figure out a way to, I believe that they all arrived to caste. They all arrived to a caste system that they had not created themselves. But I feel as if even though they entered that, that does not have to be what prevails. Caste does not have to prevail if we can find a way to transcend it.
The Great Migration is the story you told in your previous book, The Warmth of Other Suns, which we also featured on this program. One of those just incredibly powerful stories of the history of this country that we would not know without your valuable telling of that story. Isabel Wilkerson, can never thank you enough for joining us here. Always an honor to have you. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. The Pulitzer Prize winner, Isabel Wilkerson, the brilliant author of the important book Caste, which was cited by Justice Jackson in her opinion, gets tonight's last word.